I'm going to start this showing you a very common scenario where we've got a menu inside an application which needs to be toggled. So it'll either be visible or it will be hidden. And this might be toggled in a number of ways, but for example, there might be a button somewhere which shows it, maybe a menu button, or there might be an action that the user triggers which should hide it as well. So what I have here is an example homepage with this code in it. Now this code will not scale because as more and more pages are added to the application, how do those pages get access to opening and closing this menu? So let's take a look at the code itself. We've got some state for whether the menu's open, and then we've got a function which toggles the menu open. Then the state for whether it is open is used to either show the menu or hide it. This is relatively simple, and of course, in the real world, these menus are often a lot more complicated. But for the benefit of what we're going to explore today, we're going to look at how we can move this isMenuOpen Boolean variable into React context, and how we can manipulate that context in a way that scales with the application and is also simpler and will prevent bugs during the application development. Let's start off with creating a new file. I'm going to put it in a source directory, and I'm going to call it UI context. So to achieve what we're setting out to in React, we're going to need to use the React context. So I'm going to just create a context called UI context. A context is a bit of state which gets saved together and kept together, and it can be made available to components that are children and descendants of that component. So let's show you what that actually means. So I'm going to define UI context. We're going to import create context from React. We're going to start it off as just being null. And then to use it within our application and to access the state within it, we're going to write a provider. And a provider is simply just a React component which will can ask for some props to set up the state in the beginning, but then uses that context to provide the state down to its children. So let's call this UI context provider. Now, with a provider, you have to supply a value. Now, the value that we want here is going to include isMenuOpen. We'll start it off as false. This is the value which can be accessed by any of the children. And a standard way of exposing this state and this value to the children is by using hooks. Let's create a hook called useUIContext. And we're going to use context, which is a hook provided by React, and we're going to supply it with the context that we actually want to get access to. Let's import useContext from React so that we can use that. Now we have the context, a basic context set up for application. And we do need to use this provider within the application itself so that the children have access to it. Now, in the app that I'm using here, I've used a basic create next app. And so a good place to put something like a UI context, which is going to be available to the whole application, is the _app.js. We can import the provider. Then what we'll do is we will wrap the component in our new provider. Now, anything within any of our pages is going to be wrapped inside our provider, including our home page. So now we can use UI context, which will give me the value, and that value includes is menu open. We'll save the code and let's just take a look. We won't see the menu initially. Toggle menu stopped working. But if we change is menu open to true within our value, the menu is now open. Okay. Now let's look at how we can expose an interface to be able to control what this provider is actually giving to the components. We're going to start by thinking about the state. Now the state is going to be the properties on our value, which are basic properties. So is menu open is a Boolean property, and that's going to start off by being true. And now our value is essentially our state. Let's just set state. And nothing has changed yet. What we then find is we want to implement the toggle menu functionality. Now, we have a problem because if we added toggle menu to our value here, or even in the state, then the value would be changing on every render. So what we're going to need here is a use memo. What we can do with use memo is only recalculate the value when something that we control changes, so when the state actually changes. So let's wrap our functionality in use memo. It's going to return the value that we want, including toggle menu. And then we specify exactly when this use menu functionality should be recalculated. We now have a new value where is menu open starts off. Let's default it to false. We need to define use state. We need to fix use memo to be correctly spelt. and we don't see the menu here. But now we can pull this toggle menu out of our use UI context. So let's go to our index page. We'll grab toggle menu from here, save, and try again. And now you can see that we've got back to the same functionality before. So let's just have another look at why this is beneficial. What we have here is a central piece of state, which is also controlled by a centralized set and interface of methods. Now, if this state changes in a way that you don't expect within your application, you can much more easily track down exactly where this is being changed because of the way that we've implemented this here. You can then add more properties onto this, so you would tend to group common features within the same context. So this particular UI context provider might provide properties which are globally relative to the UI itself. I hope this has been useful.